Hi, I'm DG Wright, and this is the official channel of the BLS Coin Collectors Club, bringing you news and insight from the fascinating world of numismatics. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hello everyone, it's late night, well, early morning really, on 15th of April 2025. I'm sorry I've been away for so long. I was really sick with a bad bout of bronchitis that affected my voice for a while, and then I had a lot going on in my personal life and the day job, but I am back and hoping to make some more content on a regular basis. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and a comment, and don't forget to click that subscribe button. To start today's video off, we now have an official subreddit. Located at /r/BLS Coin Collectors Club, the subreddit joins this channel and our official Twitter and Blue Sky feeds, as a place to discuss coins and the hobby in general. Feel free to join the subreddit and follow our other social media feeds. Today is going to be all about various and sundry new coins in the collection. Since the recent poll results indicated people want to see more of that than the other topics we've talked about up here, plus I do have a whole bunch of new coins, that's what it's all about this time. Starting with this beautiful 1858 penny. Made of pure copper, this coin was issued 2 years before copper coins in the UK were replaced by smaller bronze issues. And these pieces are now fairly scarce due to a lot of them being recalled and melted down in the 1870s. Original mintage for the 1858 penny was a shade over 1.5 million, and there are at least 7 different obverse die varieties. This one appears to be a small date variety, which is slightly less common than the large date varieties. This specimen also features the initials of the designer, William Wyon, on Victoria's neck. I don't know if you can see that there. It's visible, but there it is, William Wyon, WW. Made rather later in 1878 was this Gothic florin. First issued in 1852 as a replacement for the 1849 Godless and Graceless florin, the Gothic florin, so called because of its Gothic style lettering, was minted for 35 years up until 1887. The 1878 issue, with a total mintage of just over 1.75 million, does not have any known varieties, unlike many of the other Gothic florins. Another Gothic florin, this one in slightly better condition, is this 1880 specimen. 1880 florins come in 2 varieties depending on the number of jewels that appear in the central cross of Victoria's crown. However, this piece, despite being less worn than the 1878 florin, has still been too heavily circulated to tell which variety we have. The 1880 florin has an overall mintage of just over 2 million and is one of the scarcer Gothic florins, although more common than the 1878 issue. 10 years later, this 1890 penny was minted. Unlike the early, apparently somewhat experimental bronze issues, by 1890 the bronze coinage had very few varieties, and none are known for the penny of this date, which carries a mintage figure of over 15 million and is a fairly common one. Victorian bronze pennies rarely occur in such good condition though. Most are far more worn than this lovely example. While the young head portrait of Victoria would continue to appear on bronze coins through 1894, the portrait was aged somewhat as of 1874. The Jubilee portrait, introduced in 1887 on the gold and silver issues, never appeared on the bronze coins. 1902 was the first year of issue for the coins of Edward VII. Son of Queen Victoria, he came to the throne in 1901 after his mother had reigned for nearly 64 years. Edward was a popular king, although he reigned for only 9 years, coming to the throne aged 59. Edward had a passion for diplomacy and foreign affairs. During his reign, the Entente Cordiale was negotiated between Britain and France, an agreement that lasts until this day. This 1902 penny is one of almost 27 million bearing this date. It is one of the more common high tide variety, referring to the sea level on the reverse. The high tide coins have the sea level where Britannia's legs cross. The scarcer low tide variety has a much lower sea level. The king's bust featured on the coins of Edward VII was designed by George William de Salle, while the Britannia reverse is a modified form of the Leonard Charles Wyon design that first appeared in 1860. Approximately 1/4 of the pennies minted bearing the date 1912 were manufactured at the Heaton Works in Birmingham. Ralph Heaton and Sons originally made bronze coinage during the Victorian era in the 1870s and 1880s, and in the reign of George V were contracted again to produce pennies. By far the commonest of the George V Heaton issues, the 1912 Heaton penny features a small letter H mint mark in the exode to the left of the date. Its mintage was nearly 17 million. Mint-marked pennies were often saved prior to decimalisation, and the 1912 H penny seems to occur more often now than its non-mint-marked counterpart. The King's bust on the coins of George V was designed by Bertram McKennell. Florins were minted in quite significant numbers during the early reign of George V, and the 1915 issue was no exception. Featuring on the reverse a modified form of the original Leonard Charles Wyon design first used in 1849, the 1915 florin had a mintage figure of over 12 million. This one, despite being significantly worn, appears to have been polished. A not ideal situation, but right now I'm just working on completing the date run. Upgrades will come later. The 1917 florin, with a mintage of slightly over 11 million, joins the other George V florins with a fairly high mintage. Despite some tarnishing and discoloration, this one is in fairly decent condition, and makes a good addition to my 20th century florin date run. An even more common issue, the 1918 florin has a mintage of over 29 million. Its design is the same as its 1915 counterpart, a design which was first used in 1911 and would continue until 1926. 1918 was the year in which the armistice ending the First World War was finally signed, ending a bloody conflict that cost millions of lives. It also cost the British economy dearly, so much so that silver coins would soon have to be debased. In 1918 and 1919, Heaton Works and the King's Norton Metal Company, also in Birmingham, assisted with the production of pennies. The latter feature a small KN mint mark left of the date. This 1919 penny, however, is a standard one minted at the Tower Hill Mint in London, one of nearly 114 million minted there that year. This particular one I purchased because it was in quite lovely condition compared to how most bronze pennies turn up, especially ones of this vintage. 1919 was the last year in which the UK issued sterling silver coins for circulation. In 1920 they would be debased to a 50% silver, 50% copper alloy. This 1919 florin, one of roughly 9.5 million minted, is in quite superb condition, appearing to have very little wear and retaining a lot of its original mint luster. Due to the British Empire bearing massive financial costs of the First World War and the inflation that followed the war itself, it was no longer viable to continue minting circulation coins in sterling silver, and after 1919 they were discontinued. One of almost 130 million minted that year, this 1921 penny is another coin in unusually nice condition. Bronze pennies usually turn up very heavily worn, especially those predating around 1926. But occasionally you stumble across a gem like this. I have a complete date run of 20th century pennies, so my focus in that area now is upgrading the badly worn ones. This penny in the 1919 coin I showed a moment ago are two examples of this. In addition to working on my 20th century florin date run, I've also been pursuing a 20th century farthings date run, filling in the gaps in my collection. This 1922 farthing is one of quite a few I've gotten hold of recently. Up until 1936, all the bronze coins bore the same design of Britannia on the reverse. A total of almost 10 million farthings were minted in 1922. By the 1920s, farthings were losing much of their purchasing power and tended to be spent less than other denominations, so from around here onwards they tend to turn up in relatively better condition than pennies or halfpennies. A good example of such is this 1927 farthing, with very little wear and a hint of mint luster remaining. This coin has clearly been circulated very little. Nearly 8 million farthings were minted in 1927, the first year in which the so-called modified effigy of King George V went into full use on bronze coins. This was intended to eliminate the phenomenon of ghosting, which resulted from the low relief on the reverse of the coins. 1928 saw the general introduction of a new design for florins, pioneered in rare proof issues of 1927. It features a modified reverse design by George Kruger Gray and the new modified effigy of the King's portrait. A shade over 11 million florins were minted in 1928. Comprised of the silver-copper alloy used since 1920, this 1928 florin shows next to no signs of wear and may in fact be an uncirculated coin. Florins would continue to be issued in 50% silver until 1946. The silver florin was replaced by a cupro-nickel equivalent in 1947. 1933 is of course the year of the near-legendary 1933 penny, only 7 examples of which are known to exist. Rather more common is the farthing of that date, which has a mintage figure of 4.5 million. As seems to be the case with later George V farthings, this one has shown up in excellent condition, although someone seems to have made an earlier attempt to polish the reverse. 1933 of course was also the year in which Hitler gained control over Germany, initiating the Third Reich. The build-up to the Second World War had begun. Less common than the previous year, only a shade over 3 million farthings were minted in 1934. This one is also in very nice condition with a pleasant even patina, no attempts at polishing here. In 1934, Hitler and his Nazi party consolidated power in Germany, while Austrian supporters of the Nazis attempted a coup in their own country. King George V celebrated his Silver Jubilee in 1935 with a special crown issue. That was also the year this farthing was made. Even fewer farthings, however, were minted in 1935, a mere 2.25 million. Once again it appears here in excellent condition, although the toning is a little uneven. 1935 saw the development of the first broad-spectrum antibiotic, while Hitler's Germany built up its military forces in violation of the 1920 treaty. Most, if not all, 1936 coins, although part of the coinage of George V, were probably minted during the short reign of his son Edward VIII, who succeeded his father on the 20th of January. This farthing, one of nearly 10 million struck that year, is in reasonably good condition, although it has suffered some corrosion. Edward VIII would never formally issue his own coinage in the UK due to his own short reign. Some patents were struck prior to his abdication in December, but are extremely rare, while some circulating coins bearing his name and image were issued in overseas territories. In 1936, Germany militarized the Rhineland, the Thylacine became extinct, the Crystal Palace burned down, and the BBC began a regular television service. George VI came to the throne in December 1936 following his brother's abdication. The first coins bearing his name and image were issued in 1937. While the Spanish Civil War raged and Stalin undertook his Great Purge in the USSR, the first farthings of George VI's reign were issued with a new reverse design created by Harold Wilson Parker, the wren, Britain's smallest bird, suitable for Britain's lowest value coin. The obverse design was by Thomas Humphrey Paget. A total of some 8 million farthings were issued in 1937. Less than 20 years remained for the farthing as a circulating coin, however. In 1938, Nazi Germany annexed both Austria and the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. As the spectre of war looms over Europe, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announces, against all the evidence, peace for our time. Within Britain itself, this farthing was made, one of roughly 7.5 million made in 1938. This coin would be in good condition were it not for the corrosion on the obverse. This is a prime candidate for an upgrade in the future. In the same year, this penny made its appearance. With a mintage figure of over 120 million, the pennies of George VI retained the reverse design of Britannia. First featured on pennies in 1797, Britannia appeared on the reverse of every copper and bronze penny made from then until 1970. This version of the design, the last version that appears on pre-decimal coins, first appeared in 1937 and would continue until its final issue. The storm over Europe finally breaks. In September 1939, the forces of Nazi Germany marched into Poland, a strategic ally of both Britain and France, who in response declare war on Germany. Coin production in the UK seems to have been unaffected by the outbreak of war, however, and this 1939 penny is one of 55 million minted at Tower Hill that year. This example is in fairly typical condition for a circulated penny of the time, but does have a lovely even brown patina. 1940 saw the defeat and occupation of France by German forces, and the subsequent Dunkirk evacuations, the Blitz, and the Battle of Britain. It also saw the minting of 18 million farthings at the Tower Hill Mint in London, of which this is one. Farthings from around 1926 onwards often show up in excellent condition, probably due to being put aside thanks to their dwindling spending power. This coin is no exception. In 1941, as British and Australian forces fought against the Axis in North Africa, some 27 million farthings were made in London. This one, in very nice condition, displays a lovely even patina, and like many farthings of this vintage, has evidently endured only a light circulation. Living and working in the US, I tend to find a lot of older coins still in circulation, and this 1942 nickel is no exception. This one, made from the usual cupro-nickel alloy, was made at the Philadelphia Mint, being one of nearly 50 million struck in 1942 in cupro-nickel at Philadelphia. 4 varieties of the 1942 nickel exist, each with their own mintage figures. These are the Philadelphia and Denver minted cupro-nickel coins, the Philadelphia copper-silver alloy coin, and the copper-silver alloy coin made at the San Francisco Mint. 1942 was the year United States entered World War II in earnest, and the year in which Alan Turing first invented computers capable of decrypting the German Enigma codes. The German attempt to take Moscow failed early in the year. 1944 was the year of the Normandy landings on D-Day, a massive Allied invasion of German-occupied Europe as the Soviet Union pushed Germany's forces back from the east. Some 25 million farthings were minted that year in England, and this is one of them. It retains a small amount of mint luster, meaning it's seen only a limited circulation, but the patina, however, indicates long exposure to the air. Nearly 80 million British pennies were minted the next year, 1945, as the Second World War ground to its bitter conclusion. Berlin fell in May of 1945, Japan surrendered in August. At the Royal Mint, no pennies were minted from 1941 to 1943, and the composition of the bronze alloy was changed slightly for the 1945 issue. To prevent the development of an unsightly patina, some of the coins were artificially darkened at the mint, although this does not appear to be one of them. The aftermath of war is often as terrible and chaotic as the war itself. 1946 saw a great many changes in the world, from nuclear testing in the Pacific to devolution in the British Empire. Much of Europe was devastated, and the UK economically drained. It would soon stop using silver for its higher value coins. Farthings, however, were unaffected. 24 million were made this year, although their spending power continued to decline, and only 10 years would remain until they were last minted. NATO was formed in 1949, while in Britain, the King's title Emperor of India, defunct since Indian independence in 1947, is finally dropped from the coinage. One of some 14 million minted this year, the 1949 penny loses the titles Ind Imp from the obverse legend, although its design otherwise remains unchanged. This 1950 farthing, one of 10 million minted that year, exhibits some curious stripes in its colouring. While it's probable that it's part of the patina or toning, it almost looks as though it could be a result of the bronze alloy not mixing properly. That sort of thing shows up fairly often in some pennies of George V, especially 1920 or 21. If this is the case, it would be unusual to see it in a later farthing. By 1956, the purchasing power of the farthing had diminished to the point where it was no longer viable to mint them. They cost more to produce than they were actually worth. As such, the 1956 farthing was the last year of mintage, and less than 2 million were ultimately made that year. 4 years later, in 1960, the farthing was demonetised and withdrawn from circulation entirely, leaving the halfpenny, or halfpenny, as the smallest circulating denomination. The obverse design for Queen Elizabeth II's farthings was by Mary Gillick, and was common to all the UK's circulating coins up until 1967. Another coin found at my work, this 1957 cent, a so-called wheat penny, was made at the Denver Mint, going by the letter D beneath the date. By then, the San Francisco Mint was no longer producing coins, and the US only minted coins at Denver and Philadelphia. These were a bronze alloy of 95% copper and 5% mixture of tin and zinc. With a total mintage topping 1 billion just for the Denver Mint, they are hardly rare, but at almost 70 years old, it's still nice to find one in decent condition still circulating. And that's it for this episode. Next time, there'll be a bunch more new acquisitions, which I simply didn't have time to squeeze in here, including a number of silver threepences and, I think it might be a first for this channel, a silver shilling. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and a comment, and don't forget to click that subscribe button.